Hello and welcome to this QuizCom webinar on aggregation and data display tools for SharePoint Online and Microsoft Teams. We're going to be looking at the Data View toolset which QuizCom offer as part of their Data View Plus app. Now this app is available for SharePoint Online as an SPFX web part, and it's made up of a number of different tools. We often refer to it as a Swiss Army knife of tools. It allows us to connect to list data with the List View Plus capability to organize and present list information in different ways with groupings, tabs, conditional formatting, configuring filters. We can also aggregate data using the Aggregator app, so pulling data together from multiple different lists, potentially across different sites, different site collections, so we'll be aggregating tasks as well. We've got the image gallery, which lets us present images and pictures from SharePoint in the way we no longer can do with SharePoint, but also doing so much more, presenting those images in lots of different ways. I'll show you the Wallchart app, which you may have seen in previous webinars which I've done, where we can connect to organizational information in the SharePoint lists, Excel spreadsheets, but perhaps most importantly using the Graph API to pull in our Active Directory organizational information and present that in a variety of different styles. And we'll also look at the Calendar Plus, where we can connect to either calendars in Exchange or calendars in SharePoint, maybe multiple calendars, pull those calendars together and manage about how we present that information. And I'll show and demonstrate to you how we can easily, as a non-technical user, build these apps up using the Lego style UI to configure them with the specific appearance which we're looking for. Now we can do all that in SharePoint, but today's webinar is going to actually be focused around Microsoft Teams. And so if you have the Data View Plus for SharePoint, you can also use it inside of Teams as well. And I'll show you how we can configure it directly within Teams to display all of those different types of formats, lots of different data sources, and have that added benefit of connecting and displaying all these sorts of different data inside of Teams. And I'll call out as I go through where I've seen some of these tools and apps be really useful to customers when they've identified key requirements for presenting information which they can't do natively in Teams, and there aren't any other apps available to do this. It's really easy to install, so I'll show you how easy it is to add the app inside of Teams and configure it directly in this demo. So that's probably enough PowerPoint for now, so let's dive in and actually show you how easy it is to configure these apps. But I'll start with showing you some which I've already built so you can understand the functionality, and then we'll actually go and configure these apps directly during the demo. So I'm just switching here to my web browser, and you can see I'm logged into Teams. I'm just using Teams in the browser today for convenience, but this works equally as well on my Teams desktop client. Now I've got a team set up here for this webinar with a number of different channels, and we'll go through and show some different examples and scenarios in these channels. I'm going to start off in the general channel, and you can see I've got a number of different apps configured here, which are different variants of that QuizCom Data View Plus app configured in those different styles to present different types of data. So let's start off with a SharePoint list. Now before I actually show you this, let me show you what it looks like underneath. So I've got a SharePoint site here, and I've got a number of lists and libraries configured. One of those lists is a suppliers list. It's a pretty simple list, and you can see here it looks pretty bland inside of SharePoint. So it's just, when it decides to wake up, it's going to show me just some standard columns of information. So a name of supplier, a type, a city, a status, and a review date. So we've probably got lots of lists like this in our organization, and they work great, but it'd be nice to be able to easily present them in Teams, but also present that in a really interactive, useful way to users. So let's go and have a look at that. So if I come here to suppliers, I've already set up this tab with the QuizCom app, and you can see here that I'm seeing that data in a really useful way. I've got some tabs here, which is breaking down my suppliers by different types. I've got some search options here, either a full text search or searching by specific fields. I can either type directly in here, or I can search by actually the options here. So if I want to look at suppliers we've got in Toronto, I can really quickly and easily search and restrict my results to return the results which I'm looking for. All of the data is exportable, so I've got little export options here and here to export the information out to CSV. And I've also got a range of commands available to do things like view item properties. Or I can even customize and change those myself. So for example, I want to display a map based on that location. I want to send an email. I want to do something else. The great thing about these tools is there's a lot of pre-configured options, and I'll show you these as I go through and configure these. There's lots of great commands which QuizCom have pre-built for you. But also, if you've got developers, you can extend this further yourself and build out your own styles and your own commands. So, example 1, customizing and displaying SharePoint list data inside of Teams. Let's look at the next example, which is the org chart, perhaps my favorite of the apps. So common requirements existed in SharePoint for pretty much the whole time I've been working with SharePoint. Being able to display an organization chart, being able to display our Active Directory information. There's no great web part out of the box in SharePoint, which Microsoft offer to do this, but QuizCom do provide it with their org chart app. And we can configure and display this inside of Teams. Now I'm connecting to my Active Directory data here via the graph, but if perhaps your Active Directory data isn't up to date, then you could use data from an Excel spreadsheet, a SharePoint list. You can use those different data sources if you want. And this org chart's really interactive, so I can come in here and I can explore my org chart, expand out and look at different sections of my org chart if I want to. I can search here, so again, if I want to search and say, actually, I'm only interested in, let's say, the marketing department, this will then focus my org chart on that specific department, just showing me that hierarchy. I can present my data in different ways, so I'll show you configuring this app shortly, and I'll show you the different styles around how we can present things. We can also conditionally format individual items in our org chart, or even define and present things like assistants differently. If we click on an individual user, we get this little card here where we can see key snippets of additional information, telephone numbers, contact information, social profiles, and we even get a link off to their profile inside of SharePoint as well. So really valuable, great in something like maybe you're using an organizational wide team in your company to have that sort of central place to communicate and share information in your organization. This would be a great app to configure and make available in that team, or even within a sort of sub-business unit, department team, and you just want to have the organizational structure for that team as well. Lots of different options about how you use this app. The next one is the calendar app, and I'll actually show you a second example of using this shortly, but this one's just connecting to my calendar, so using the graph to connect and display my calendar. And sure, I can do that directly within Teams, but have it here in the context of an individual team, and have the ability to control and present that in different ways, viewing it weekly, by the day, monthly. And I'm also doing some conditional formatting here, which I'll show you more of later. So being able to come in here and present different items on the calendar in different ways. So regular items I've got in blue, but items where I've got vacations, I'm presenting in pink. So all of those different apps support conditional formatting, and I'll show you more examples of using that as we go through the demo today. Now the final example which I've got configured in this specific channel is the picture library. Now, we used to be able to do a fair amount with pictures inside of SharePoint when we were in the sort of SharePoint 2003, SharePoint 2007, I believe even 2010 days. But over time, Microsoft has sort of phased that out, and there's not a great way to present and manage pictures. We can store them still, but the way they're presented is just a list in a document library, not very friendly. And if we want to look and visualize pictures inside of Teams, then the QuizCom app's a great way to do this. This is just a slide gallery of a recent trip I made to Zurich, and it will automatically slide through it, or I can go and look at specific pictures straight away and scroll through my catalogue of pictures here. Now, I'll take the opportunity here just to look briefly at the settings around this app, although we'll drill into settings more as we go through. I just want to do this just to show you the different ways we can present pictures. So if I come in here and click settings, suddenly I get a lot more activity. I get this panel here where I can start to configure my app. Now, all the QuizCom apps come with a basic mode, a basic setup, generic format about how we want to use them, the most commonly used way they're used. We can do minor changes, but you can also switch to advanced mode. And when you switch to advanced mode, you can start to configure different elements of how the app's going to be presented. And we'll look at this in a lot more detail later on. But I just want to use the opportunity here to just show you that we can then present this picture library app in different ways. So we've got the slideshow, we can see it as a list, picture gallery, table. I like the photo pile myself. It just provides a really nice interactive way of going and exploring a specific picture, maybe browsing through my pictures here. So just to give you an immediate flavor of how configurable, customizable these apps are, and how easy it is to do within Teams. Now, that should hopefully give you an initial flavour of some of the apps. Let's move on and have a look at a specific scenario of how they might be used. So I've got a second channel here called Projects. And perhaps one of the most common uses of Teams is for projects. So managing all sorts of information around projects, whether that's documents, whether that's tasks, whether that's appointments, risks, whatever it might be. And I'm presenting a lot of different information here. Let me show you what I've got behind the scenes in SharePoint first, and then I'll talk about how this is then going to be presented using the QuizCom Data View apps. So back to my SharePoint site. And I've got a few different things going on here. Firstly, I've got a couple of task lists. So I've just called one project tasks. It's got a few different tasks in there. And I've got another one called business tasks. Similar setup, just some different dates attached to it. Now, for simplicity in my demo, I'm using two task lists within the same site. These could be spread across multiple sub-sites or different site collections within my Office 365 tenant, and I can aggregate them using the Data View Plus. I've also got a project calendar. So I've been asked personally about this several times in the last few months. We've got a calendar, we've got a list of events here, but I'd like to be able to present that within Teams. How can I do that? And finally, I've got something a little bit custom going on. So I'm managing some key risks in a SharePoint list. What's the probability of that risk? What's the severity of that risk? Who are the owners? And this is so I can show you how, using the Data View Plus app, we can present custom controls inside of SharePoint and inside of Teams. So let's look at how we use all of these. So returning to my team, let's first look at tasks. So we saw those two different task lists. We might have task lists all around my organization. Let's bring them together for this project and use Teams to do that. So here I've configured the Data View Plus app, and I'm aggregating data from both of those task lists. And I'm presenting that in a really neat way. So I'm using tabs here. to present based on status. I've got a search here to look by assigned to, and you'll notice I've got the conditional formatting to say any tasks which are overdue, present them in red. Now this is just how I've chosen to configure it, but it's very simple and easy for me to set up. I can even click on my little label here to actually see just the overdue items using the conditional formatting. So very easy and simple to pull data together. It doesn't have to be tasks. Tasks are just a great example of doing it, to aggregate my information from different SharePoint locations and present that within my team. Calendar. Now we've seen calendars already, but just to show you the fact that we don't necessarily just have to connect to Exchange calendars using the graph, we can also connect to calendars stored within SharePoint. And this is really a missing thing. You know, it's not easy to now, in the modern SharePoint interface, present a calendar control. You end up in the classic SharePoint display, and that won't load correctly within Teams. The Calendar Plus app is configurable, it looks and is appropriate and modern, and sits and works neatly within Teams. So fits that really nice idea of, well, actually I've got a calendar for my project and I want to display it within my team. Finally, risks. So we talked about other sorts of data and presenting that in different ways. So this is actually one of the standard custom controls which QuizCom make available as part of the Data View Plus app. So presenting my risks on this matrix, a color-coded matrix, based on that probability and severity. And it's just an example, and there's several other examples and samples built into the app. But you can also, as I said, if you've got development resources, then build out your own custom controls. Well, that's something which QuizCom can help you build out as well. Now, before I move on to configuring these, the other important thing to say is this is Teams. So this is Teams functionality. So I'm presenting these as apps, but then I can do everything which I want to, which I could normally do within Teams. So I can have conversations. I can open up the conversation for this app, and I can see a conversation I've started to have with Andrew here about this specific data. So I can come back in here and I can go, let's mention Andrew and then say, thanks for the update. And that will then appear in his Teams as a notification. And we can also see that conversation thread around this app in the posts section. So all of that conversation history, and that link will drive me straight into that specific app again, so I can see it all. So leveraging all of that value of Teams around conversations, but presenting really useful business information from Excel, SharePoint locations, or data we store within Microsoft Graph. So that's how it looks, that's how we can use it. Let's look at how we can configure it. So I set up this other channel just because it's a brand new channel, and we'll use it for the basis of this configuration. So I'm coming in to add a tab. Now I've already got the QuizCom app set up here, so I can just come in here and select it straight away. I won't post the channel in this case, but I'm just going to add this app. And it's then going to say, well, which of the products do I want to configure here? So let's pick the List View Plus. So this is all about connecting to a SharePoint list, either within my current site or a different site or site collection, and configuring and displaying it in different ways. So that example of that supplier list, and I'm going to show you how I built that out. So I can select which site I'm connecting to. I can select which list I'm connecting to. So let's connect to the suppliers list. And the data's there straight away. It's really easy and there's not any mappings. When I'm connecting to some other data sources, I might need to think about how the data's mapped, organizational chart information, which I'll show you in a second. Now that's immediately going to load it, and it's just going to present it in a very basic form, so that basic mode which I talked about. Now we can come in and make changes. So let's come in and hit settings, and then let's switch to advanced mode. And we're able to start editing the experience. We can start to add these additional components here. So let's say, for instance, well, we don't need folders in this case. We don't need any paging because we've only got a few items. But let's start to add some other options here. So let's say we want some groups. So how I'd grouped it by supplier type previously. Now at the moment, that's based it on approved versus pending. That's okay, but let's modify that. And I can do that using this sort of Lego UI controls, just clicking on configure control. I can also drag and drop here, and I'll show you that in a second. But I can say, well, what do I want to group by? In this case, I want to group by supplier type. And it's updated. You can also drag and drop these columns on here to change the groupings directly as well. I can do other things. So at this point, well, I'm showing supplier type in this table. I probably don't need that. So I can come here and I can actually say, well, which columns do I actually want? Well, I'd like the supplier name. I'd like the city. I'd like to see whether what's its status. And I'd like the review date added. Okay, so very quickly configure which columns. We can also configure these different actions. That's where I'd come in and configure things like map controls, other things like that. We haven't really got time to cover all of that today, but if you're interested in any of that, do reach out and we can talk through some of those wider options. What else could we do here? Well, we could come in and we could add some conditional formatting. So let's say we want to see the approved suppliers in green. Really simple to do. Let's add the conditional formatting control. And we can say, well, what do we want to do here? We want to define how it's going to be formatted. Do we want to set an icon, a color, a background color? I like the background color. It's very clear. So let's select a nice green. And then we've got lots of different options here. We can highlight it, select it, define its mark its new. But we can also define the condition. Let's just close that so we can see what we're doing. And we will come in here and we will go status is equal to approved. And we've got lots of other different conditions we can do here, but we're just to go with equals for now. We'll save that. And we can now see that only the ones which are approved are marked in green. And it's that simple, really. We can come in and do other things like add or customize our filter controls, but I'll show you that in the next example. So, List View Plus, presenting, formatting SharePoint list data directly within Teams, and done that very, very quickly. Let's come and add another tab. And in this case, we're going to configure the org chart. So in this case, I've selected the org chart. I'm going to select data source. So the range of different data sources we're going to choose from. But I'm going to use the graph. Now, don't worry, you don't need to be an expert in using graph to do this. QuizCom provides you with a number of samples available to you, including the AD org chart. So I'm going to choose that sample. Now, if you're a more advanced user, there's lots of opportunities to come in and customize this. If you use additional columns in your organization, you can. And because we're selecting graph, there's a bit more to configure here. We have to go and define our mapping. So, for example, I need to say, well, that field should actually be my display name. That looks better. So my Wallchart really, really quickly and easily configured. Just wait for that to load my content. Let's do some quick cosmetic things like rename my tab. And now let's look at how we can present that org chart information. So again, set up something by default pre-configured, but I can come in here and click settings, and I can start to customize it. Again, I've got basic options available to me, but if I switch to advanced mode, I get a lot more options. I can start to configure the filter control. So I can say, well, actually, I don't want the free text filter anymore. So let's hide that. I can define which columns I'd like to have available as searchable. So let's say I want job title and I want department searchable. I can do that, I can configure that. I can even define pre-default filters on here. So if I only wanted to show the org chart for a specific department, I could do that at this point. We've got a range of styles available to us. We can do conditional formatting, but we've seen that once already, so we won't dwell on that any longer. But there are a range of different org chart controls. This is probably my favourite, but just to show you a couple of other ways it can be presented. There's one of the other styles. And there's the other style, and we can do all sorts of other formatting on top of that. Let's return to my favorite one. But we can do things like define default number of levels, the zoom, the content height, orientation, layout, templates to use. So let's say we want it done with rectangles, we can do that, or in grey, we can do that. And there's lots of other options here to do things like the showing the toolbar, showing the search, export, endless configurations. And if we configure a conditional format, one of the additional options we get is the assistant. So we could say if, for example, the job title contains assistant. Oh, I just lost those settings. Let's just do that again. So I could come in here and I could go if the job title contains assistant, then that's the assistant option, and we can just tick that there. If I just close that now, we'll see that that assistant option is presented differently. And as part of the style here, we can also define how the assistant option is presented. So that's just two examples of how we can configure the different apps. There's obviously a range of other apps to configure, including the aggregator, the Calendar Plus, the library, and also the Data View toolset with all of its custom controls. But we haven't got another 2 hours for me to go through all of those. So let's wrap up now with a brief summary, and then we'll move on to just taking your questions as well. So just to briefly summarize, I'm not really technical anymore. I used to be a bit technical, but I've shown you how quick and easy that is to set up. It's designed for non-technical users. There wasn't anything complicated there around the setup. It's very easy to connect to different data sources, whether that's SharePoint List, Excel, but we can also leverage the power of the graph, whether that's connecting to Exchange data, organizational chart information, or any other information within Microsoft Graph. We can do that as well. It's really easy to customize this as well using that sort of Lego style builder UI. We can build out the filters, the conditional formatting, the layouts of each of the apps. And we can always extend it. We can extend it with pre-built custom controls and actions, or if we have some specific requirement, we can extend that with your own custom controls and actions. Now that's enough of me talking, so thank you very much, and let's open it up for some further questions. Thank you for watching this webinar recording. If you need any further assistance from QuizCom, please contact us using the contact information shown on screen.